The small, architecturally elegant birdhouse was a splash of cheerful color against the mature oak tree in Lorraine Banks's new front yard. She just finished hanging it, a custom-designed piece crafted from reclaimed cedar, hoping to attract local songbirds to her little corner of the otherwise meticulously manicured and rather sterile community of Oak Haven Preserve. She'd even put out a small, tasteful bird bath nearby. It was a simple gesture of harmony with nature. That harmony was about to be brutally shattered. Mr. Stephen Albright, the HOA president, a man whose personal aesthetics seemed to be a strict adherence to beige and whose tolerance for anything resembling wild nature was non-existent, was already marching across her lawn. He was flanked by two grim-faced HOA landscape compliance officers, one of whom, a hulking man named Gary, was ominously wielding a long-handled pry bar. "Ms. Banks!" Stephen's voice, as sharp and unpleasant as a rusty saw, cut through the morning air. "What is that? That avian slum you've nailed to that unfortunate tree? That feathered flophouse is an unapproved, unsightly, and frankly, pest-attracting structure. It is in direct violation of Oak Haven Preserve's covenants, Article 15, Section 4, prohibiting all forms of non-approved wildlife encouragement and/or rustic yard clutter." Lorraine, who had been enjoying a cup of tea on her porch, admiring a bluebird already investigating her new birdhouse, rose slowly, her initial surprise hardening into disbelief. "Mr. Albright, good morning. This is a simple birdhouse intended to attract songbirds. It's hardly rustic yard clutter. It's an enhancement to the local ecosystem." "Enhancement?" Albright scoffed, his face contorting with disdain. "It's an open invitation to rats, squirrels, diseased pigeons, and bird droppings all over our pristine sidewalks. It's nature trash, Miss Banks. It attracts pests and lowers property values. And it's coming down right now before it triggers a neighborhood infestation." Before Lorraine could even protest further, he snapped his fingers at Gary. "Pry that abomination off the tree, Gary, and be quick about it. Then smash it. We don't want anyone else getting any bright ideas about turning their yards into unsanitary bird slums." "No! Stop!" Lorraine cried out, rushing forward, but Albright and his other associate physically blocked her path. She watched in horrified disbelief as Gary, with a grunt of effort, savagely ripped the beautiful cedar birdhouse from the tree, sending it crashing to the ground. He then, with a malicious grin, brought the heel of his heavy work boot down on it repeatedly, splintering the delicate woodwork into a dozen pieces. The small, hopeful chirping of the bluebird was replaced by the sickening crunch of destruction. "That's what we think of your nature trash and your pest-attracting slums, Ms. Banks," Stephen Albright declared triumphantly, his face flushed with a disturbing, almost gleeful sense of power. He then raised a megaphone, a familiar accessory to his reign of terror. "Attention, Oak Haven Preserve residents!" His amplified voice, dripping with self-righteousness, echoed through the otherwise peaceful neighborhood. "Your diligent HOA has taken immediate action to remove an unapproved and hazardous wildlife installation on Willow Walk. The resident, Ms. Lorraine Banks, a newcomer with a clear disregard for our community's aesthetic standards and public health, was attempting to turn her property into a breeding ground for pests and disease. She is a landscape destroyer, an irresponsible menace, and her nature junk has been dealt with." Landscape destroyer? Irresponsible menace? Lorraine, a woman who chaired Wild Fund, one of the largest and most respected private wildlife conservation foundations in the world, who had personally overseen the creation of vast nature preserves across multiple continents, felt a wave of cold, incredulous fury. Neighbors, drawn by Albright's characteristic public denunciation, began to emerge from their homes. Some looked merely curious, but many, already conditioned by Albright's iron-fisted rule and his fear-mongering about anything that wasn't perfectly manicured and controlled, quickly took his side. "That birdhouse did look a bit messy, didn't it, dear?" One woman stage whispered to her companion, loud enough for Lorraine to hear. "Probably full of bird mites already." "Stephen's absolutely right to smash it," another man shouted from his immaculate lawn, clearly one of Albright's staunchest supporters. We don't need that kind of wild animal nonsense here, attracting rats and spreading diseases. He should fine her for endangering the community." A group of teenagers, snickering, then began to pick up the splintered pieces of Lorraine's birdhouse and toss them back onto her lawn, along with other random bits of wood scraps and debris from the street. "This is an outrage, vandalism, willful destruction of private property," Lorraine stated, her voice tight with controlled anger, her eyes blazing at Albright. "That birdhouse was a gift, a symbol of my commitment to coexisting with our local wildlife. You have acted like a barbarian." "Barbarian?" Albright sneered as his other associate, a woman with a sour face named Doris, gleefully filmed the entire scene on her smartphone, making sure to get close-ups of Lorraine's distressed face and the smashed birdhouse. "We are simply upholding the civilized standards that make Oak Haven Preserve a premier residential community. Something your kind, with your penchant for wild and natural, clearly doesn't understand. We have it all on camera, Ms. Banks. Your illegal structure, your defiant attitude, your clear attempt to turn our neighborhood into a backwoods swamp. This will be excellent evidence for the county health department and for our lawsuit against you." He then produced a pre-printed HOA citation. "And speaking of violations, Ms. Banks, this is your official notice. For erecting an unauthorized wildlife habitat structure, for creating a potential pest and disease vector, for violating multiple aesthetic covenants, and for the cost incurred by this HOA in sanitizing your property line of this nature trash, you are hereby fined $500, payable within 48 hours. He thrust the citation at her. "And be warned, if we see so much as another twig or bird seed crumb that hasn't been pre-approved by the HOA Landscape Committee, the fines will escalate exponentially, and we will pursue your eviction for being an incorrigible threat to community harmony and public health." $500. Eviction for a birdhouse. Lorraine Banks, a conservation billionaire whose wild fund had saved entire ecosystems from destruction, whose quiet philanthropy supported wildlife sanctuaries across the globe, was being treated like a public health menace by a petty tyrant whose understanding of ecology wouldn't fill a bird feeder. The video, titled "Oak Haven Ho Heroes, Smash Pest Infested, Nature Trash, Residents Wildlife Menace Neutralized," Zrania was, as promised, virally circulating on local social media within the hour. It was a masterpiece of manipulative editing, portraying Lorraine as an unhinged, crazy bird lady and Stephen Albright as the calm, courageous defender of neighborhood safety and aesthetic purity. The comments section was a predictable inferno of racist assumptions, anti-environmentalist screeds, and fervent praise for Albright's strong, decisive leadership in protecting property values from eco-nuts. Lorraine stood amidst the scattered, splintered remains of her beautiful birdhouse, her heart aching not just for the small act of creation that had been so brutally destroyed, but for the profound ignorance and hatred that had fueled it. This wasn't just about a birdhouse. This was about a mindset that saw nature as an enemy, diversity as a threat, and compassion as a weakness. But as she looked at Stephen Albright's smug, triumphant face, a different kind of natural force began to awaken within her. The unyielding, strategic patience of a seasoned conservationist, and the formidable power of a woman who moved mountains and saved forests for a living. He thought he had won a battle against nature trash. He had no idea he had just declared war on Mother Nature's most powerful and well-funded advocate. His little patch of manicured, sterile paradise was about to get a serious ecological and legal makeover. The charred, splintered remains of her beautiful cedar birdhouse, a small beacon of hope for local songbirds, became a daily symbol of Mr. Stephen Albright's tyrannical ignorance for Lorraine Banks. The $500 fine notice, now accompanied by increasingly threatening letters demanding she cease and desist all activities encouraging undesirable wildlife congregation, felt like a personal declaration of war against nature itself. While Stephen was busy on the Oak Haven Preserve HOA's website, posting educational articles, penned by himself, on the dangers of backyard bird feeding, a public health crisis, and Why native plants are a threat to property values. Lorraine was on secure video conferences with the legal team of WildFund, the multi-billion-dollar global wildlife protection foundation she chaired, and with a cadre of high-powered environmental lawyers who specialized in land use, conservation easements, and battling NIMBYism. He smashed a custom-designed ecological monitoring birdhouse, called it nature trash, fined you for it, and is now trying to ban all wildlife encouragement. Dr. Alistair Finch, Wild Fund's chief ecologist and a man who had faced down poachers in the Serengeti, had asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief and cold fury. Lorraine, this isn't just an overzealous HOA president. This is a manifestation of a dangerous anti-nature sentiment. Wild Fund's legal department will, of course, provide any and all support. This Albright fellow is about to learn that some nature lovers have very, very sharp teeth, legally speaking. Their initial official response was a letter to the Oak Haven Preserve HOA and Mr. Stephen Albright personally, so dense with citations of federal migratory bird treaties, state wildlife protection statutes, local nuisance law, which Albright was actually violating with his loudspeaker, and constitutional property rights that it should have induced immediate apoplexy in any competent legal counsel. It demanded not only a full public apology and restitution for the destroyed birdhouse, now valued with its integrated research sensors at over $2,000, but also an immediate halt to the HOA's campaign of harassment and slander, and a formal review of all HOA bylaws pertaining to landscaping and wildlife to ensure compliance with state and federal environmental law. It warned of impending legal action, seeking substantial punitive damages and injunctive relief that could potentially strip the HOA of its authority over common areas if found to be engaging in ecologically damaging practices. Stephen Albright received this formidable legal document, glanced at the Wild Fund letterhead, which he dismissed as some tree-hugger activist group trying to scare us, and promptly shredded it at an emergency HOA, neighborhood sterilization and pest eradication, meeting he convened in his perfectly astroturfed backyard. "Look at this, my loyal residents," he'd bellowed, holding up the confetti of the legal letter. "The bird-brained bankswoman from Willow Walk is now trying to bury us in paperwork from her radical, eco-terrorist friends. She thinks she can intimidate us with threats of lawsuits because we won't let her turn Oak Haven Preserve into a mosquito-infested swamp filled with diseased pigeons and rabid squirrels. Well, we will not be cowed. We will double down on our efforts to maintain a clean, safe, and wildlife-free environment for our families." His neighborhood sterilization initiative became a grotesque crusade against any sign of natural life. He pushed the HOA board, now a quivering assembly of his most sycophantic followers and a few terrified dissenters, to enact a series of draconian emergency ecological purity bylaws. Bylaw 66. B. The deliberate feeding or harboring of any non-domesticated avian, mammalian, or reptilian species is strictly prohibited and subject to a $100 daily fine per observed infraction. Bylaw 67C. All private residential landscaping must consist of no less than 80% HOA-approved low-attractant inorganic ground cover, i.e., gravel, decorative stone, or high-quality artificial turf. No more than 10% of any private yard may be dedicated to live organic plantings, and all such plantings must be from the HOA's pest-resistant, non-fruiting, non-flowering, beige or muted green only cultivar list. Essentially, he was trying to legislate nature out of existence in Oak Haven Preserve. The online slander campaign escalated into outright demonization. Stephen, using various anonymous accounts, began posting scientific reports, plagiarized from fringe websites, about the dangers of common songbirds carrying avian flu and how squirrels are primary vectors for bubonic plague. He posted security camera footage, heavily edited and decontextualized, allegedly showing rats as big as cats near Lorraine's property line, blaming her irresponsible bird-attracting habits. The comment section became a maelstrom of fear, ignorance, and calls for Lorraine to be fumigated along with her yard. How could one man's irrational fear of a birdhouse and a few songbirds metastasize into such a toxic, community-wide phobia? Lorraine, amidst this escalating madness, focused on her mission with the calm, strategic precision of a seasoned conservation leader. Her home, her intended sanctuary, had become a depressing testament to ecological ignorance. But she was also seeing a unique opportunity. She meticulously documented every new bylaw, every slanderous post, every act of petty harassment, like her trash cans being repeatedly filled with dead leaves and branches from other people's yards, with notes saying, "Take your nature trash with you." She also began a quiet, in-depth investigation into the legal status and deed restrictions of the large, underutilized community park that bordered the Oak Haven Preserve development, a park the HOA ostensibly managed but largely neglected, using it mainly as a justification for high HOA fees, while keeping it mostly inaccessible with overly restrictive rules. The hints of her true identity, her global influence as a conservation billionaire and the president of Wild Fun, continued to be hilariously, tragically misinterpreted by Stephen and his chief informant, Doris, who now wore a full hazmat-style painter's suit whenever she bravely conducted surveillance on Lorraine's contaminated ecohazard zone. One afternoon, a discreet armored vehicle, the kind used for transporting priceless artifacts or very large sums of cash, delivered a series of heavy sealed crates to Lorraine's house. These contained sensitive ecological monitoring equipment, advanced wildlife camera traps, and secure data storage units that WildFund was deploying for a new urban biodiversity study Lorraine was personally overseeing in several cities. Doris, observing from her window with a pair of night vision goggles she'd bought from a prepper website, nearly had a stroke. "Stephen! Stephen! It's worse than we thought!" she shrieked into her phone. "She's not just attracting birds. She's got cages, huge metal cages, and men in black delivering them. She's starting a zoo for dangerous animals, or maybe she's smuggling endangered species for the black market. This is an international wildlife trafficking ring operating right here in Oak Haven." Stephen, whose understanding of wildlife conservation was limited to complaining about deer eating his prize-winning and non-native azaleas, readily agreed. "An illegal zoo, I knew it. She's probably got lions and tigers in those crates. This woman is a menace to civilization itself." Another time, Lorraine was on a very public live-stream video panel for the United Nations Environment Program, discussing global strategies for halting biodiversity loss. She spoke eloquently about WildFund's multi-billion-dollar commitment to creating interconnected wildlife corridors and funding boots-on-the-ground anti-poaching units in Africa and Asia. Stephen's nephew, Kevin, who apparently had a knack for stumbling upon the online activities of HOA victims, saw a clip. He didn't recognize Lorraine in her formal attire, speaking with global leaders, but he heard Wild Fun, billions, anti-poaching units, and Africa. He excitedly told his Uncle Stephen, "Uncle Stephen, that Banks woman, the one with the bird junk, I think she's secretly an arms dealer for African warlords. I heard her talking about billions and anti-poaching units. That's code for mercenaries, right? And she mentioned wild funds, probably slush money. She's not just crazy, she's a dangerous international arms trafficker." Stephen was now utterly convinced that Lorraine Banks was not just an eccentric nature lover, but a diabolical billionaire eco-terrorist, potentially running an illegal zoo and arming foreign militias from her suburban backyard. He felt a surge of almost messianic purpose. He was the thin beige line protecting Oak Haven Preserve, and indeed the free world, from her nefarious schemes. He decided the time for mere fines and online shaming was over. He had to deliver the coup de grace at the upcoming HOA Environmental Stewardship Workshop. He had the HOA's terrified lawyer, Skip Peterson, who was now seriously considering a career change to llama farming, draft a final order of nuisance abatement and property forfeiture. This document, which had dubious legal standing but looked very intimidating with its gold foil HOA seal, declared Lorraine's entire property a persistent ecological hazard and a blight upon community values, and stated that if all fines, now totaling an imaginative $75,000, including penalties for harboring unregistered avian species and failure to maintain a sufficiently sterile yard, were not paid within 24 hours of the workshop, the HOA would move to place a lien on her property and petition the county for its condemnation and forfeiture for purposes of community ecological remediation, i.e., paving it over and planting more beige gravel. Lorraine received this latest masterpiece of legal buffoonery. She looked at the date of the Environmental Stewardship Workshop, the following Saturday, to be held with maximum irony in the neglected, litter-strewn Oak Haven Preserve Community Park. A slow, dangerous smile, the smile of an apex predator who has just seen a particularly foolish gazelle wander into her territory, spread across Lorraine's face. A workshop in the park. How perfect. She made a series of calls to Dr. Alistair Finch, Wild Fund's chief ecologist, to the heads of the National Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, and the Nature Conservancy, to the State Parks Department director, an old friend, to a team of renowned landscape architects specializing in ecological restoration and public park design, and to her lead counsel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lorraine had said, her voice calm and infused with a steely resolve, "Mr. Stephen Albright of the Oak Haven Preserve, HOA, is planning what he calls an environmental stewardship workshop in their community park next Saturday. He intends it to be my public condemnation. I intend it to be the unveiling of Wild Fund's newest and perhaps most poetic urban wildlife sanctuary and ecological education center. Yes, in that very park. I believe its current deed restrictions and the HOA's documented mismanagement provide us with a rather compelling legal and ethical imperative. Please prepare all necessary documentation, ecological assessments, architectural renderings, and a very significant press release. It's going to be quite an enlightening, workshop for Mr. Albright." Stephen Albright was planning to cement his control over a sterile suburb. Lorraine Banks, Conservation Billionaire, was preparing to liberate an ecosystem and unleash a biodiversity bombshell. The Oak Haven Preserve Community Park, a rather desolate expanse of overmown grass and a few struggling, non-native shrubs, served as the incongruous stage for Stephen Albright's Environmental Stewardship Workshop. He stood on a rickety folding table, his makeshift podium clutching his megaphone, ready to deliver his vision of a pristine, wildlife-free paradise to the assembled residents. His crudely drawn charts depicting HOA-approved pest-free landscaping, mostly concrete and astroturf, and the dangers of unregulated avian squatters, featuring an alarming cartoon of diseased pigeons, were taped precariously to a nearby tree. "And so, my fellow discerning residents," Stephen was pontificating, his voice amplified and grating, "it is absolutely imperative that this homeowners association takes a firm, proactive, and, dare I say, final stance against any and all so-called wildlife encouragement schemes that threaten our hard-earned property values, our children's safety from pestilence, and the very aesthetic fabric of our beautiful Oak Haven Preserve. We must vote today unanimously to implement the Pristine Preserve Protocol. This protocol includes, but is not limited to, increased deployment of industrial-grade pesticides in all common areas, the mandatory removal of all unapproved natural elements from private yards, and, of course," he shot a venomous glare towards where he assumed Lorraine Banks might be cowering, "the immediate levying of all outstanding fines and the initiation of eviction proceedings against residents like Ms. Lorraine Banks, who stubbornly persist in their misguided, dangerous, and frankly, unhygienic attempts to turn our beautiful neighborhood into a backwoods swamp infested with vermin." He paused, expecting a roar of approval. Instead, a curious hush fell over the crowd as a new and far more impressive entourage made its way to the edge of the park. Lorraine Banks walked calmly, confidently towards them. She was not alone. Flanking her was Dr. Alistair Finch, Wild Fund's distinguished chief ecologist, a man whose weathered face spoke of countless expeditions into the world's wildest places. Beside him were two renowned landscape architects unrolling breathtaking, full-color blueprints and site renderings. A sharp-suited woman, clearly a high-powered environmental lawyer from a major national firm, carried a thick leather briefcase. Several aides discreetly began setting up a professional-grade portable projector and screen. Lorraine herself carried a simple, elegant wooden box. Stephen Albright stared, momentarily dumbstruck by this sudden, professional-looking assembly. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he found his voice. "Well, Ms. Banks," he finally sputtered, his face flushing in angry mottled red. "Decided to bring your bird-brained brigade to try and disrupt our official HOA environmental workshop with your tree-hugging nonsense? Or are these the experts who told you that attracting diseased squirrels and poop-bombing pigeons with your nature trash was a sound ecological strategy?" His core supporters tittered nervously, but many other residents looked intrigued, their attention completely captured by Lorraine's dignified arrival. Lorraine stepped onto the grass, her demeanor serene but radiating an unshakable authority that instantly commanded the space. "Mr. Albright, residents of Oak Haven Preserve," she began, her voice clear, calm, and carrying easily without the need for amplification, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "You are gathered here today under Mr. Albright's rather alarmist guidance to discuss the environmental stewardship of this community park. I and my colleagues from Wild Fund are here to offer a rather more informed, scientifically sound, and significantly more ambitious vision for its future." She opened the elegant wooden box she carried and carefully withdrew a heavy, beautifully crafted bronze medallion, inlaid with precious stones, depicting a soaring eagle over a pristine landscape. She held it up for all to see. "This," she said, the sun glinting off its surface, "is the International Conservation Laureate Medal, one of several global awards I have been deeply humbled to receive for my lifelong dedication to habitat preservation, biodiversity protection, and the fostering of a sustainable, harmonious coexistence between humanity and the natural world. My name is Lorraine Banks. I am the founder and current president of Wild Fund, a multi-billion-dollar international philanthropic foundation. We manage and protect over 50 million acres of critical wildlife sanctuaries across 6 continents, fund cutting-edge ecological research, and champion environmental education programs worldwide." A collective gasp, followed by a stunned, almost fearful silence, swept through the assembled residents. Stephen Albright's jaw had dropped so far it practically rested on his chest. His face was rapidly transitioning from angry red to a ghastly, chalky white. He looked as though he'd seen a particularly terrifying and very well-funded ghost. "The small, handcrafted cedar birdhouse that you, Mr. Albright," Lorraine continued, her voice now like ice, her gaze pinning him where he stood on his rickety table, "so ignorantly, so viciously, and so publicly ordered destroyed in my yard, the one you derided as nature trash and a pest-attracting slum, was not, as you claimed, an eyesore. It was, in fact, an advanced prototype for a new line of scientifically designed urban songbird habitats, incorporating specialized non-toxic nesting materials, predator deterrence, and discrete data logging sensors. It was part of a Wild Fund initiative to study and support declining native songbird populations in suburban ecosystems. Ecosystems like Oak Haven Preserve, before your HOA's pristine preserve protocol, turns them into sterile, lifeless monocultures." She then gestured to the landscape architects, who had now unfurled their breathtaking, full-color renderings and site plans on easels. The projection screen behind them simultaneously came to life with a stunning 3D animated fly-through of a transformed Oak Haven Preserve Park, a park now teeming with native trees, wildflowers, meandering streams, boardwalks through small wetland areas, discrete observation blinds, and yes, hundreds of beautiful, scientifically designed birdhouses and pollinator gardens. "For several months, Mr. Albright," Lorraine announced, her voice now filled with a passionate energy that captivated her audience, "Wild Fund, in collaboration with leading ecologists, ornithologists, landscape designers, and with the full enthusiastic cooperation and legal blessing of the State Land Trust, which, as it turns out, holds significant and legally binding oversight covenants on this particular 20-acre parcel of community parkland due to its original dedication as a public green space and wildlife corridor, has been developing a comprehensive, fully funded, multi-million-dollar plan to revitalize and transform this currently neglected and mismanaged tract. Effective today, she continued as her environmental lawyer calmly handed a thick, official-looking document to a now visibly trembling and sweating Stephen Albright. Following a final review and unanimous approval by the State Land Trust Board, citing the Oak Haven Preserve HOA's demonstrable and persistent failure to meet its ecological stewardship obligations, its active engagement in practices detrimental to public enjoyment and biodiversity, and its clear violation of multiple deeded public trust covenants, Wild Fund will be assuming primary management, restoration, and revitalization responsibility for this parkland. We will be investing $5 million of Wild Fund's resources to create the Oak Haven Songbird Sanctuary and Public Nature Preserve. It will feature miles of walking trails, interactive educational kiosks about local flora and fauna, professionally guided nature walks, a small native plant nursery, a dedicated wetland habitat to attract migratory birds and beneficial insects, and, of course, hundreds of beautiful, scientifically designed birdhouses and pollinator gardens. It will be a jewel for this entire city, a haven for wildlife, a place of peace, learning, and natural beauty for all citizens, with free and open public access, 7 days a week, from dawn till dusk. She paused, then looked directly at the crumbling figure of Stephen Albright, whose face was now a mask of abject terror and disbelief. "And Mr. Albright," she added, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, yet carrying a final, devastating weight, "given your unique and very public contributions to the genesis of this project, the current board members of the Oak Haven Preserve HOA and any resident who actively participated in or publicly supported the destruction of wildlife habitats, the promotion of ecological ignorance, or the harassment of those who seek to protect our natural world, will be respectfully discouraged from attending the VIP preview and dedication ceremony next spring. Perhaps you can all enjoy the enhanced birdsong and the cleaner air from a suitable and aesthetically compliant distance." The park erupted, not with the jeers Stephen had expected for Lorraine, but with a tidal wave of shocked, then furious, then overwhelmingly enthusiastic noise. "A conservation billionaire?" one man screamed, shaking his head in disbelief. "And Stephen Albright called her birdhouse trash and tried to fine her? He didn't just poke a bear, he tried to bulldoze its private nature preserve. He got our park taken over by a global wildlife foundation because he hated a few sparrows." Another woman shrieked at Stephen, who now looked like he was about to faint. He stumbled off his rickety table and nearly fell, his reign of ecological terror definitively and very publicly over. He was surrounded by angry residents, many of whom had secretly chafed under his sterile regime, now demanding his immediate resignation. Lorraine Banks watched the scene for a moment, then addressed the excited crowd. "Nature, my friends," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "is not an adversary to be conquered or a mess to be sterilized. It is our shared heritage, our life support system, the source of infinite wonder and solace. Justice in its truest, most profound form is not just for human beings. It is for the birds that grace our skies, the trees that give us air, the wildflowers that feed our pollinators, and the very land that sustains us all. May Oak Haven Preserve now, finally, become a true haven, where the song of justice and the chirping chorus of countless birds can ring out freely for generations to come." The legal and public fallout for Stephen Albright was catastrophic. He was immediately and unceremoniously ousted as HOA president by an enraged and deeply embarrassed community. The Oak Haven Preserve HOA, facing potential lawsuits from the State Land Trust for years of mismanagement, and from Lorraine Banks personally for defamation and property destruction, she pursued a modest settlement, which she immediately donated to Wild Fund's Urban Habitat Program, was forced to completely reform its bylaws and its entire leadership structure, under strict state oversight or face dissolution. The Oak Haven Songbird Sanctuary and Public Nature Preserve, under WildFund's expert guidance and Lorraine Banks's passionate vision, was developed ahead of schedule and became a magnificent, nationally acclaimed success. It was a vibrant oasis of biodiversity, a beloved destination for birdwatchers, families, school children, and anyone seeking solace in nature, dramatically increasing the actual desirability and ecological health of the entire surrounding region. Lorraine, already a global icon in conservation, received further international accolades for this innovative urban sanctuary project. She also established the Banks Nature Center and Institute for Urban Ecology at the edge of the sanctuary, offering free educational programs, citizen science initiatives, and workshops on creating wildlife-friendly communities. And yes, Stephen Albright and his former core group of pristine preserve protocol enforcers were, by a unanimous vote of the sanctuary's new community advisory board, comprised of grateful Oak Haven residents and leading ecologists, politely but firmly informed that their presence was not required nor desired at any future sanctuary events or within the Institute's programs. The final, uniquely fitting scene, a year later. The Oak Haven Songbird Sanctuary is a riot of color and sound. Birdsong fills the air, wildflowers carpet the meadows, and children are eagerly pointing out different species to a smiling park ranger. Stephen Albright, a gaunt, solitary, and broken figure, is seen standing forlornly on the public sidewalk just outside the beautifully landscaped, now very popular, sanctuary entrance. He cannot enter. A discreet but firm park ranger stands near the gate. He clutches a small, pathetically splintered piece of painted cedar wood in his hand, an unrecognizable remnant of Lorraine's original, destroyed birdhouse. He watches a brilliant blue indigo bunting land on a branch just inside the sanctuary fence, sing a few defiant, joyful notes, then flit deeper into the protected haven. A profound, shuddering sigh of irrevocable loss and bitter regret escapes him. He turns and shuffles away, a ghost haunting the edges of the vibrant natural paradise he inadvertently helped create through his own downfall. The camera pans up to the magnificent, rustic yet elegant sign at the entrance to the Oak Haven Songbird Sanctuary. It's carved from reclaimed wood and features a beautifully rendered songbird in flight. The final graphic overlay from the prompt appears, perhaps as if etched into the sign by sunlight. Oak Haven Songbird Sanctuary, Chirping Justice. The imagined audience would erupt in cheers, a joyous chorus for nature, for wisdom, and for a justice that truly sings. She didn't just win, she rewilded his soul and his park. Stephen Albright got bird-brained by a billionaire eco-warrior. That's what you call turning HOA trash into a treasure for all.